And now the Gene Burns program continues on NewsTalk 910. Filling in today, John Rothman.
Yes, it is an hour devoted to an iconic hero, Batman. And I have to tell you, we're very lucky because we have Bruce Scivally with us. I've interviewed Bruce before because he wrote an absolutely superb book about Superman and the whole aspect of Superman. And Bruce Scivally has written a new book called $1 Billion Batman. He'll tell you how you can get hold of it. Bruce, I'm delighted to welcome you to 910.
Well, it's great to be back here. I appreciate you inviting me back on the show.
Well, let's define Batman. A fictional character, a comic book superhero. He was created by artist Bob Kane and writer Bill Finger. The character first appeared in Detective Comics 27 back in May of 1939, and since then, well, he took off like a bat out of Batcave. How did you get involved with Batman, and describe for us his cultural significance?
Well, I think how I got involved with it goes back to when I was a very little kid watching the old Adam West TV show on television. I think all of us who were of age at that time, around 5 or 6 years old, just became besotted with Batman like the rest of the nation. And then some years later when I wrote the Superman book, as I was traveling around promoting that, everyone would keep asking me, when are you going to write one on Batman? So it took a few years, but I finally pulled it all together and got a book out on Batman.
Now, go back for a minute to Bob Kane, the guy who created Batman. Who was he? How did he come up with the idea?
Well, Bob Kane was only about 18 years old when he developed his character, and how he came up with the idea is really pretty simple. He came up with it because he wanted to make a lot of money, and he did very well with it. But he was talking to Vin Sullivan, who was an editor at DC Comics, back International Comics, as it was called at that time. And they got on the subject of Schuster and Siegel, the guys who'd created Superman. And then Sullivan told them that they were making like $500 a week each, as opposed to most of the comic artists and writers at that time who were getting like $50. And he said, if someone could come up with another character like that, they'd kind of have it made. So Bob Kane said, well, this is on a Friday. He said, I'll have something for you on Monday. So he got together with Bill Finger, whom he'd already been working with, and Bob Kane kind of gave conflicting stories over the years about how it came about. He always wanted to make it sound like he was the sole creator of Batman, and that it was an idea he'd had years earlier and all that sort of thing. But if Bob Kane had sort of had his way, Batman would be a character with just a little black domino mask and a red suit. It was really Bill Finger who told him, well, no, let's go to the dictionary, look up bat, see what a bat looks like. Changed the suit to gray and black, gave him the cowl and the white eyes where you didn't see the irises, all that stuff. So Bill Finger's contribution to it is really pretty major, but Bob Kane was the guy who always had it in his contract that he'd always be credited as creator Batman.
Now, I have to tell you, it was our good friend Bruce Detman, a mutual friend of ours, who told me about this book, and I want to thank Bruce on the air because he is a great comic book aficionado and really knows his stuff. I have to tell you, I went a few years ago to a movie theater and watched the Batman serial from the days of World War II. Batman had a huge impact, didn't he?
Yeah, that was 1943. Batman actually made it to the serials before Superman did. And in that serial, of course, having been made right after Pearl Harbor, it's hard to watch now because it's an extremely racist, anti-Japanese portrayal of the villain, but the serial's a lot of fun nonetheless. And of course, being a serial, they want to highlight all the fist fights. So Batman's not quite like he is in the comics. He's not a very good fighter in the serial. Neither is Robin. They're always getting beat up and knocked out and so on. And they didn't have the budget to have a Batmobile, so it's basically Alfred driving him around in a car where they're changing clothes in the back and so on. However, the serial made a very important contribution to the comic book, and that is the Batcave. The Batcave comes from the serial, not from the comics.
Would you hold on one second? Let's get cut two.
Come on, Robin. To the Batcave. We haven't one moment to lose.
And, of course, you talk about the Batcave. I want you to pause for a moment and describe to us Robin and where he came from, and the Batcave and what it meant.
Well, Robin came from the idea that, Batman was alone for the first year, and I think some of the Batman writers kind of had a little bit of trouble with that of, were they always going to have him just with thought balloons over his head? They felt like he needed someone to talk to, so they gave him Robin the Boy Wonder. So it was only about a year after he was created that Robin came onto the scene, and of course, once Robin arrived, after that point, every superhero had to have the kid's sidekick. Captain America had Bucky, the Flash had Speedy, on and on and on. Big Superman's probably the only one who didn't. But the writers kind of thought, too, that having Robin in there would give little kids a character they could identify with. But I've always felt that psychology is a little off kilter, because little kids who are reading comics want to be Batman. They don't want to be Robin.
Describe for us the Batcave. I think the Batcave was one of the most intriguing ideas, and there it was, right underneath Bruce Wayne's house.
Yeah, it's almost like Batcave. I guess it's almost symbolic of Batman's psyche in some way. The sort of dark underpinning of this man. Who's his whole reason for fighting crime is because his parents were murdered when he was a young boy. So he's driven by revenge, and wanting to create the order out of chaos in the world. So in some ways, I think the Batcave is almost symbolic of that, with beautiful Wayne Mansion sitting atop this dark, dreary cave. But, of course, in the old comics, it was also where Batman kept not only all his equipment, but all the trophies from his various crime-fighting escapades. Like the giant penny in there from one of the, I forget the character's name now, from one of the villains that he fought, So it became sort of a museum as well as a place for him to have all his equipment.
Was that a sort of a takeoff on the Fortress of Solitude, or did the Fortress of Solitude take off after the Batcave?
I think the Fortress of Solitude might have come later. It was actually more of a takeoff, if anything. I mean, again, Bob Kane got the idea when he was visiting the set of the serial and saw that they put Batman in a cave. I guess the serial writers thought, hey, he's a bat, he must be in a cave. And Bob Kane thought that's a great idea, so he brought that back with him to New York, and they started putting it in the comic books from that time on. But Bob Kane had said also that he'd always, Batman was partly inspired by Zorro. And, of course, in Zorro, Zorro had the cave underneath his house where he'd go down and put on his suit and get on his black horse and go charging out of the cave, not unlike Batman sliding down the pole and getting in the Batmobile.
Absolutely marvelous. Let me ask you a question. We're going to talk about villains in a few minutes, but I want to ask you, was Batman at the beginning a dark figure or a light figure? When I was a kid, I liked Superman because he was more light, if you will. Batman always struck me as being dark.
Yeah, I think that certainly exists. When he was in the first year of those comic books, they were trying to kind of figure out who this character is, and those stories are much more kind of film noir, a little darker in tone. A couple of the comics, Batman actually carries a gun. I think, maybe shoots some people in the comic books. So it was a very different interpretation than what he would become once Robin came on the scene, and he was sort of this wisecracking superhero. But when you look at those comic book stories, Superman comic stories almost always took place in daylight. The Batman comic book stories almost always took place at night. So they're very different conceptions there.
Well, we've got to take a break, but Bruce Scivally is my guest, and his book is $1 Billion Batman. If you're a Batman fanatic, you got to read the book. And Bruce, I'm going to have you explain to people how they can get an autographed copy when we get back. I am John Rothman. I'm in for Gene Burns. And, of course, we're talking Batman. When we come back, well, one of my favorite villains was the Penguin. And wait till you hear the sound we have of the Penguin, a.k.a. Burgess Meredith, right here on the Gene Burns program. The number to call if you have questions about Batman, 1-800-345-5639. I am John Rothman in for Gene Burns.
Holy non-sequiturs!
I don't think so, Robert.
Holy anagrams, what's the answer? Holy contributing to the delinquency of minors. Holy Fourth Amendment.
The Gene Burns program. NewsTalk 910.
Holy scalding.
Exactly, Robin.
Batman. Who is he? Who is this acrobatic clown who somersaults around Gotham City in a ridiculous costume? I suggest that behind that mask, Batman is, in reality, dangerous criminal. Why else does he wear a mask?
The Penguin. And, of course, that's the voice of Burgess Meredith. My guest is Bruce Scivally. He has written Billion Dollar Batman, A History of the Caped Crusader on film, radio, and television, from a 10-cent comic book to a global icon. Bruce, absolutely a delight. Describe the villains as they emerge in Batman.
I'm sorry, John. There was still a clip playing over your audio there. You have to ask the question again.
Okay. I'm sorry. It must be the delay. Describe for me the villains in Batman. Who were they? How did they evolve?
Well, Batman had probably the best rogues gallery of villains of any comic book character. I mean, there's still some of the most memorable villains ever created, with the Joker, the Penguin, the Riddler, and so on. The Joker came about, I think basically Jerry Robinson came in one day with a Joker playing card from a deck of cards, and sort of chatting it up with Bill Finger and Bob Kane. They developed the idea for this criminal character who had the white face and was a sort of evil clown. And they were also inspired somewhat for the look of the Joker by an old movie called The Man Who Laughs with Conrad Veidt. And the Penguin, Bob Kane says, came about to him when he looked at a package of cool cigarettes and saw the little penguin symbol on there and thought that would be kind of an interesting character for a villain, to have a sort of dapper villain for Batman. So, they were inspired by various things, but certainly are very memorable characters that are still with us today.
Let me just say, we have a clip of Jim Carrey in Batman Forever with the Riddler, and that's cut number 7 on our list. Can we play that? I just think that'd be fun to throw in here.
You've been sucking Gotham's brainwaves, and now you've devised a way to read men's minds.
You betcha! Soon my little box will be on countless TVs around the world, feeding me credit card numbers, bank codes, sexual fantasies, and little white lies. Into my head they'll go.
Now,
Victory is inevitable.
Of course, in Batman Forever, and we'll talk more about that later, it's a much darker villain than, say, a Burgess Meredith played, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, certainly the movies are darker than the TV show ever was, and particularly when you look at the Joker in the first Batman movie, the Jack Nicholson Joker, or much later the Heath Ledger Joker. Those are far removed from the Cesar Romero Joker of the TV show.
And Cesar Romero, describe Cesar Romero and his feeling about that role.
Well, I think he really enjoyed that role. I think you can see it when he plays it. He'd always kind of played these sort of dapper gentlemen, and here he had the chance to really kind of cut loose. And I think all the actors who came on that show as villains said it was a chance to really just chew the scenery and ham it up and have a good time. What's interesting is that Cesar Romero was not the first choice. They actually wanted Jose Ferrer to play the role, but he turned it down. Then they went to Gig Young, and he turned it down. And then Cesar Romero was the third person they went to. He was absolutely perfect for it.
Can you
They also wanted, they also wanted Mickey Rooney to play the Penguin.
Oh, really?
Which would have been very different than Burgess Meredith, who was perfect for it.
By the way, all of this is found in Bruce's wonderful book, Billion Dollar Batman. If people want to get an autographed copy, how do they do that?
Well, they can go to my website, www.brucecivally.com. And if you want to know how to spell that, just look up Billion Dollar Batman on Google. But go to brucecivily.com, and there's an order form there where you can get autographed copies of that and my other books as well.
Now, I want you, if you would be so kind, to describe. Well, first, let me play something. We have a movie trailer from the 1966 movie Adam West and Burt Ward playing Batman and Robin, respectively. Before we describe these two characters, let's hear just a little bit of that movie trailer. Did we get the movie trailer? That would be cut.
Emergency. Batman speaking. Warning all of you to brace yourselves for big news.
The biggest.
Tell them, Robin.
Holy superlatives, Batman. It's really exciting. Soon, very soon, Batman and I will be batapulting right out of your TV sets and onto your theater screens.
That's right, Robin. Our first full-length motion picture feature in color opens a whole new world of thrills. The big screen gives us more space on land, sea, and in the air to challenge the most cataclysmic collection of super criminals that ever plotted to take over the world.
Number 1, the Riddler. Question: who's going to make the feathers fly and knock Batman and Robin out of the sky? Number 2, the Joker. Have you heard this one? It'll kill you, Batman. Number 3, the Penguin.
There are 2 eggs this wily bird is going to scramble, Batman and Robin.
Number 4, the Catwoman.
Oh, you're going to see the perfect crime when I get Batman in my claws.
And that's just a sample of the exciting exploits ahead in our first feature motion picture.
Holy memoranda, folks. Make a note not to miss it.
Good thinking, Robin.
And, of course, that a clip from the movie trailer with Adam West and Burt Ward. For a lot of people, just like Superman will always be George Reeves, Batman will always be Adam West, and Robin will always, always, always be Burt Ward. Describe these two men and how they came to their roles.
Well, Adam West had been acting for quite a while. He was actually from Washington State. I believe his real name was Bill Anderson, but there was already a Bill Anderson on the Screen Actors Guild. So when he became an actor, he changed his name to Adam West, using some family names. And he'd been in Hawaii where he was doing a radio show, and when films would shoot over there, sometimes he'd make appearances in them. But then he came to Hollywood in the late 50s, began doing guest spots on television. I think was on The Defenders for a season. Was doing some film work and made a movie, one of the last movies of the Three Stooges. I think it was Three Stooges Out West or something like that. I can't remember now. I should know that title, but I just blanked on it. But, anyway, he was having a little bit of success as an actor and doing some commercials and so on. And it was in a commercial for Nestle's Quick that William Dozier saw him. Dozier had actually wanted to get a different actor. I think it was Ty Hardin to play Batman. But Hardin had gone over to Italy to do some Westerns. So Hardin's agent said, well, I've got this other guy you should look at, and showed him some pictures of West. And Dozier remembered him from the commercials and called him in, and he turned out to be perfect for it. And then Burt Ward was a guy who didn't really have any professional experience. He was trying to get into films, but was, I think, selling real estate at the time and just barely getting by. And one of the guys he sold the house to knew they were looking for a Robin and suggested him, so he goes in to meet with Dozier and got the part. His real name is Burton Jervis, so they didn't think Jervis sounded very good, so he changed his name to Burt Ward.
Absolutely marvelous. And, of course, they were only on for 3 seasons doing the TV show, but it was phenomenal. And is it true, as you record in your book, that you cannot get the DVDs of the Batman TV show because they're still held and not released?
Yeah, they've never been available legitimately on DVD. I mean, you can get them, but they're gray market or black market copies. They haven't ever been officially released on DVD. And that's, because Fox produced a TV series, Warner Brothers owns rights to the character, and there's all sorts of rights issues involved in straightening out that Gordian knot. And both of them say, they would love to be making the millions of dollars they know they'd get if they could release it, but they just can't come to terms on all the legal issues there.
My guest...
however,
Go ahead, Bruce.
I'm sorry. However, the movie is available, and the only reason the movie was able to be released is because there was a clause in the contract for the movie that it would be available for airline showings, and broadly interpreted that they think that would also include other forms of exploiting it like DVD. But the TV shows, the contracts for those said they were only for television, and that's why they haven't made them available for DVD. My
guest is Bruce Scivally. His book, $1 Billion Batman, A History of the Cape Crusader on Film, Radio, and Television from 10-cent comic book to global icon. Well, you can get it. All you have to do is go to $1 Billion Batman, and you can order an autographed copy. I have one, and I'm thrilled. When we come back, we'll take your calls, of course, 1-800-345-5639. Any questions about Batman? We will talk about Batman Returns. We'll talk about Batman Dark Knight. We'll talk about Batman Forever. We'll talk about all of that and more with Bruce Scivally right here on the Gene Burns program. I am John Rothman.
When you can't take it anymore, when you have to speak your mind, shout it out here. San Francisco's talk station is News Talk 910.
And, of course, Batman Returns, and Bruce Scivally has given us the gift of $1 Billion Batman. And you can go to $1 Billion Batman, the website, and you can get an autographed copy. Bruce, absolutely splendid. We're having a lot of fun, and I have a lot of listeners. And this comes from Jack, who wants to know, why was the TV series canceled after 3 seasons?
Well, that's pretty simple. It was canceled because of low ratings. It was a huge hit in its first half season. It actually premiered halfway through the season. And ABC shows were doing so poorly, they were looking for sort of mid-season replacements and what they called the second season. And Batman was one of about 4 shows that premiered during that second season, and they only wanted to really become a huge hit right out of the gate. But it was a sort of thing that it was a huge hit initially, but it very quickly began to sort of taper off, and it fell farther and farther down in the ratings until by the 3rd season it was really not doing well at all. So that's why it was canceled. Although there are rumors, according to Adam West and I think also Burt Ward, that NBC was interested in picking it up for a 4th season after ABC canceled it. But by the time that offer came in, they'd already destroyed the sets, and it would have cost too much to rebuild them.
Fascinating. Let me go to Bruce, who is calling from San Francisco. Bruce, welcome to 910.
Hello, John. How are you?
Now, I have to tell everybody, this is Bruce Detman. It is because of Bruce Detman that Bruce Scivally is here on the air. And, Bruce, I saluted you earlier, but I salute you again. You're a great friend and a wonderful source. So fire away with your question.
I could use any salute I could get. Hello, Bruce. How are you?
Oh, wait. We have a problem here. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Which one of you can hear me?
Bruce Detman, I can hear you.
Okay, Bruce. Bruce Scivally is now back. Do we have him? And I hope we have him. Bruce, are you there?
Now, yes, Bruce D is here.
Okay,
yeah.
We got Bruce D. We've got Bruce Scivally. This is live radio, ladies and gentlemen. Bruce, take it away.
Bruce, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you doing?
Good. One of the things, being a baby boomer, and John and I are about the same age, I grew up, of course, loving Batman and Superman and not having anything to compare them with because I never saw the earlier comics at the time. But certainly, although people said that at the time that the Adam West show came on, there was a lot of comments, well, this is camp, this is making fun of them. But in reality, I mean, after the attacks on comic books in the early 50s from Frederick Wertham and other people at the Congress, isn't it true that Batman sort of became silly and more juvenile in the 50s when you had things like Bat Dog and Bat Mite and all these things, that it was almost self-parody in the 50s. Even Superman, had Super Baby and Super Horse and all those things that never appeared in their earlier carnations, late 30s, 40s. So the Batman series wasn't really that much of a leap, do you think?
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, when you look at those comic book stories from the 50s and early 60s, you get things. There was one of them where Batman became a baby, still in his Batman outfit, but he's a baby, fighting crime like a toddler. So, some of those stories got very silly and kind of out there.
Can I say really quickly that I've read
the TV show was a pretty accurate reflection
of that. It's a terrific book.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
The research is brilliant. Okay, thanks very much.
All right. Thanks so much, Bruce, for calling. Bruce, let me ask you, the television series ends, and there is sort of a hiatus in terms of Batman. How does Batman come back?
Well, it wasn't as easy as you'd think. The real reason Batman comes back is because of a guy named Michael Uslan, who's the executive producer of all the Batman movies. And he was a fellow who, Batman had always been his favorite hero. And seeing the TV show, he felt that, the TV show was kind of making fun of his favorite hero. And he sort of had a mission to kind of wipe the words "Pal Batman Zap" out of the collective conscience of America. So he set out to, get the rights to the Batman character, which he eventually did. He worked first worked at DC Comics, then worked for a while at United Artists as an attorney after getting a law degree, so he was very focused, like his whole life, on acquiring these rights and doing something with them. And once he got the rights, he thought, okay, now I'll go out to Hollywood. They'll welcome me with open arms, and this movie will get made. What he found out was no one wanted to make the movie because the only thing they could think of Batman was the Adam West show, and they didn't understand why anyone would want to make a movie based on some old silly show from the 1960s. So what he thought would be kind of an overnight thing took him actually about 10 years of developing scripts and making contacts and trying to get this thing done. And one of the things that really helped it was when the graphic novel The Dark Knight Returns came out, which cast Batman in an entirely different light, very dark, grim sort of story of a 50-ish Batman coming out of retirement. And Frank Miller had written kind of as a response to the Bernard Goetz subway shootings, So that sort of reintroduced a different kind of Batman into the public consciousness. And ever since then, the public's been more accepting of that very dark take on Batman, and that's what we've had in all the movies that have come out after that.
So really the dark figure that emerges is because of the need to balance the lighter figure that appeared in the TV series.
Well, I think it was a reaction against that. I mean, right after the TV series went off the air, there were some new editors at DC, Denny O'Neil and an artist, Neil Adams, who wanted to kind of revamp the Batman comics. They had introduced the new look Batman in the early 60s, which is the first time he had the yellow oval on his chest instead of just the bat. And, the TV show reflected that. But then around 1970, with Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, they wanted to bring the character more up to date, make him more in tune with that era, with those times of the 1970s. And that was a time when, you had Watergate, you had a lot of cynicism in the country, you had the youth movement, you had all these things. So they kind of got rid of Robin, sent him off to school, made Batman kind of a lone operator again, gave him more of a sports car than a Batmobile, had him in a penthouse instead of Wayne Mansion, and he almost became more of like a James Bond kind of figure in those comics, So, that was kind of a response to the TV show in a way. And then again, as I say, once The Dark Knight Returns came out, they got such media attention that it totally sort of revamped the way people thought about Batman.
Talk to me for a minute about Batman as an animated cartoon on TV. That also was a big hit, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. There had been an animated series in the 1960s by Filmation, the company that had introduced Superman to TV as an animated character in 1966. And the following year, they did a Batman show with the voice of Batman done by the guy who had played the old choir master on the Andy Griffith Show. Ulan Soule was his name. This kind of skinny, reedy-looking actor, but he had a great voice, so he played Batman. And then around 1990, after the Tim Burton movie came out, a new animated series came on, where they were sort of patterning the look of it after the old 1940s Max Fleischer Superman cartoon. But that series was a big hit, both critically and with the fans, and has spawned, tons of spin-offs ever since. So that's one of the things I really don't cover very much in the book, because if I covered the animated series and all the iterations of that, the book would be, bigger than War and Peace. It'd be like 2,000 pages.
The book, of course, is $1 Billion Batman. It is available by going to $1 Billion Batman and Bruce Scivally.
Actually, it's going to BruceScivally.com.
Okay, and that's pronounced Scivally. Bruce, Scivally.com. It is a wonderful gift. When we come back for our last segment, I want you to talk about the various incarnations in recent movies. We'll play some sound. We'll have more fun. I'm John Rothman, in for Gene Burns, right here on 910.
Holy non-sequiturs!
I don't think so, Robert.
Holy anagrams, what's the answer? Holy contributing to the delinquency of minors. Holy Fourth Amendment.
The Gene Burns Program. News Talk 910.
Holy scalding.
Exactly, Robin.
Selena Kyle. You're fired. And Bruce Wayne. Why are you dressed up like Batman?
Because he is Batman, you moron.
Was.
You killed me. The Penguin killed me. Batman killed me. That's 3 lives down. You got enough in there to finish me off?
One way to find out.
4, 5.
And there goes Catwoman. My guest is Bruce Scivally. We are talking about Billion Dollar Batman. Again, you spell Bruce's last name Scivally. If you go to brucescivally.com, you can order the book. And, of course, the book is also available on Amazon. But if you want it autographed, that's the way to go. Bruce, talk to me about the movies. First, give us each year, each title and each star.
Well, the first one was 1989. That's Michael Keaton playing Batman in Batman. He did a sequel a couple years later, 1991, I believe, Batman Returns. Sorry, 92, Batman Returns, again with Michael Keaton. Then you get about a 3-year break around 95. You have Batman Forever with Val Kilmer, followed in 97 by George Clooney in Batman and Robin. And then there's a big break until you get to about 2005 or so with Batman Begins, followed by The Dark Knight, both of those with Christian Bale, directed by Christopher Nolan.
If you were going to have a Batman film festival, what's your favorite Batman film?
My favorite is, well, it depends on what mood I'm in. If I want to be happy, I'll watch the 1966 movie with Adam West. But beyond that, I think maybe The Dark Knight's probably my favorite of all of them.
You know, if we can go to Cut 9, we'll play just the theme of Batman, Dark Knight, just to remind people what it sounds like. You can hear in the music, Bruce, the difference between the light of the Batman TV show and Batman movie with Adam West and the Dark Knight theme. To what do you credit Batman's persistence as an icon and as a billion-dollar industry, as you put it?
Well, I think the appeal of Batman as opposed to Superman, I was always a little more of a Superman fan myself, but I found that in general most people respond to Batman. And I think the reason behind that, as I say in the preface to my book, is that Superman's a character who kind of represents goodness and light and hope, and Batman's a much darker character. Again, he's a character born out of revenge, so he represents more of the sort of, dark stirrings of our soul a little more. And in the book, I say that, Superman is who he represents who we aspire to be, whereas Batman is who we are. And I think that's basically the basis of his appeal. All of us feel like we could be Batman. Especially, if we had his billions of dollars to build all those gadgets.
And you've got to remember that the genius was, how did Batman make his money? Was it left to him by his parents when they died?
Yes, it was. In Batman Begins, it's established that his father is a very wealthy philanthropist and apparently a doctor. I think he was a doctor in the comic books as well, Thomas Wayne. But yeah, I mean, presumably he's from old money. I don't think either his dad or he had to work at it very much.
I've got to ask you. I have an email here from Alfred. Okay, entirely appropriate. Who wants to know where in the heck did Alfred come from?
Well, he was introduced in the comics in the early 1940s. When he was first introduced, he was kind of a portly stereotype of a British butler, but when they made the serial in 1943, they cast a very skinny actor to play the role. So in the comics, since they wanted to make the comic character match the movie character more, they had Alfred kind of go away to a spa for a little bit and come back as a much thinner character.
I love it. I love it. Today, the Batman character, in terms of his development, is the comic book as important as it was in terms of his character development?
I think the comics are still important in kind of setting the tone for how the character is going to be perceived, but I think really if you look at the movies, the portion of that audience who actually read the comic books is very small. The movies are sort of their own standalone thing with their own audience, and I think, most of the people who go through those movies either don't read the comics or maybe have never read the comics, so they just respond to the character. But I think it'll be interesting, since the Christopher Nolan movie that's coming out in July, to see how Warner Brothers carries it on, because it's again, they call it their biggest corporate asset, And considering they own Harry Potter, that's saying a lot. So you know they're going to keep making these movies, but it'll be interesting to see which direction you take it in after The Dark Knight Rises.
Leanne emails with a question I was going to ask anyway. What is the relationship between Batman and Superman?
Well, in the comics of the 1940s, they were always friendly. And, Batman never had his own radio show, but he would sometimes pop up on the Superman radio show where, say in the book, he was played mostly by Gary Merrill, who married Betty Davis. So Betty Davis is married to Batman, which is interesting. But, they were always friendly in the comic books in the 40s. In the comic books of the 80s and 90s, there was more of an antagonistic relationship between them. To the point that at one point in the 1990s and early 2000s, Warner's was considering making a movie called Superman versus Batman, which would have them kind of coming to blows at the end of the movie.
Boy, that would have been something. Although I remember a comic book, Superman versus Batman, in which they staged something to confuse a criminal, which, sounds eminently fair. I have to ask you, and again, we have a question here from Sam who says, how did you do your research?
Well, I do as much as I can by interviews. So I interviewed quite a few people for this book, including Lorenzo Simple Jr., who was one of the creators of the TV show, and Tom Mankiewicz, a James Bond screenwriter who wrote the first scripts for the Batman movie series. They, of course, went with other writers after they had it in development for about 10 years. And, as many people as I could who were involved with the makings of these TV shows and so on. Also, one of the first people I interviewed was Michael Wilson, who produces the James Bond films, because his father was the first Batman, Lewis Wilson, in the series.
Well, Bruce, you did a great job. You did a great job, and I want people to know that they can order the book by going to Bruce Scivally, SCIVALLY.com. Bruce, you're a gentleman, a scholar, and a pleasure to have you on the program.
Well, thank you again for having me back. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Bruce. All right, ladies and gentlemen, my time is up. I want to say a big thank you to Raymond Tennyson, the impresario at the board, our wonderful screener, Randy Brown, who also put together most of the sound tonight, Corey Cullowert, our producer, and, of course, our news anchor extraordinaire in the Batcave to this moment, Clark Reed. I will be back with you next Monday and Tuesday. Of course, you will have Gil Gross tomorrow and Thursday, Ed and Rosie on Friday. I am John Rothman, delighted to be with you right here on News Talk 910 in for Gene Burns.
Holy non sequiturs!
I don't think so, Robert.
Holy anagrams, what's the answer? Holy contributing to the delinquency of minors. Holy Fourth Amendment.
The Gene Burns Program. News Talk 910.
Holy scalding.
Exactly, Robin.